2A, Conference of Labor Negotiators regarding CSEA information was shared. And item 2B, Conference with Labor Negotiators regarding SMEA information was shared as well. And on item C, Conference with Legal Counsel, anticipated litigation information was shared there also. We'll move on to first do the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Valencia is our newest board member to be. We're going to bid a sad farewell, I'm sure, to Mrs. Oliver at some point, but we welcome you, Mr. Valencia. Thank you for joining us tonight. And please feel free to say the pledge at home. All right, Mr. Lara, you're up.
Thank you. Right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey, John,
No.
do you want to explain why Mr. Valencia is our new future board member so that?
Well, I would be glad to try.
I mean,
I'll do my best.
We haven't had an election yet, and
No, that's a great question. So there are 3 open spots. As incumbents, Mrs. Cordero and I had both applied for 2 of those 3. And Mrs. Oliver is leaving us after being with us for quite some time on the board. And so the 3rd spot was not to be filled by or applied for by an incumbent. And Mr. Valencia was good enough to offer his services in applying for that. And because there were not any other folks who were signed up to run, there will not be an election. We will be the new 3 board members installed at the December organizational meeting. And so therefore, welcome again, Ricardo.
thank you. Welcome.
Thanks, Vita. So on the calendar of upcoming events, September 7th has passed us already, hard to believe. September 23rd, we have a special board meeting, which was related to the discussion item we're going over tonight. And then October 14th of 2020 will be our next regular scheduled board meeting. In regards to public comment, do we have any public comment, Mr. Ontiveros?
We have no public comments were submitted by yesterday's deadline for this evening's meeting.
Okay, so we will forego that item. We'll ask then on regards to the approval of tonight's agenda as presented, we have action items 7A, B, C, and D, followed by discussion, item 8A, which is the public hearing, and then in regards to the learning continuity and attendance plan. And as that discussion item, 8A is very germane to what's going on with us right now, and probably most germane to most of us. I've asked that be moved up so that we can allow Mrs. Herrick and Mr. King and others who are going to tell us about the continuity and attendance plan and have that discussion to move that up, and then we'll go back to action. Is that good? Just a motion as amended.
Motion as amended.
Okay. Okay, so it's been moved by Mrs. Flores, seconded by Mr. Lara, that the approval of the agenda as amended with discussion item 8A moving forward. We'll approve the consent agenda.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Oh, let's go. Sorry. Roll call on the agenda.
Mrs. Flores,
Aye.
Mr. Lara,
Aye.
Mrs. Oliver's absent, Mrs. Cordero,
She's muted.
She muted?
Live from Montana.
Thumbs
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Mr. Hollinshead.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Taveros. All right, motion passes and we'll move on the consent agenda to approve.
I'll make the motion to approve consent agenda as presented.
I second.
And Mr. Lara's moved and Mrs. Flores seconded on to approve the consent agenda. Roll call on that as well.
Mrs. Flores,
Aye.
Mr. Lara,
Aye.
Mrs. Cordero,
Thumbs up.
Mr. Hollinshead.
Aye. All right, as Mrs. Herrick and those who are presenting on the discussion item, Melissa, are you guys ready to move forward with that? Where's Melissa there? There she
Yeah.
is.
She's in our corner here.
Are you unmuted, Melissa?
She's not muted, but we can't hear her.
Yeah.
Can't hear her at all.
Hello, she is.
Everybody's looking at Brian.
Do your magic, Brian. Do your magic.
Oh, there's Miss Flores. Over on the big screen.
Any idea how to fix it?
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I had to use my principal voice. Okay, so Rebecca just took my whole screen away. Okay, so good evening, board members, superintendent, and stakeholders watching from home. As you know, in a few minutes, our Director of Plan Alignment, Rebecca Herrick, will be presenting our first draft of the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. The final draft will come back to the board for approval in 2 weeks at our special board meeting, after we've heard feedback from the board tonight, and then we have more feedback that we will be receiving from stakeholders that Ms. Herrick will discuss. The draft, while not in completed form, you need to remember that, it's a draft, it's not in completed form, is a compilation of work happening in almost every department and site in the system. So the draft that you're seeing is information from HR, from business, from teaching and learning, from special ed, from expanded learning, from what's happening at sites with teachers, with leaders, with classified. It really is a compilation of all of the work moving forward. And as always in this world, it is ever changing. So as we're adding more work in, then more work adds into our plan. So thank you to all involved in gathering and sharing this information to inform our draft, many of which are on this call and will be available for questions at the end of our presentation. So I'll now hand it over to Ms. Herrick and mute myself.
Thank you, Ms. Dutra. Good evening, board members, Mr. Ontiveros, and cabinet members. I want to thank the Instructional Service Department team for their hard work on the Learning Continuity and Attendance Draft Plan that we will be reviewing this evening. So this year we have a plan alignment cycle. Move this over a little bit. And our cycle is a continuous cycle. We adapt, we implement, we grow, we reflect as we work on the implementation of our plans. We have already been working on several plans this year in the months of July, August, and September. Our goal is to align all of our plans to our vision of student success. Although we are in the adapt stage of the Learning Continuity and Attendance Draft Plan, we continue to reflect due to the school closure in March and our re-entry into the new school year via the distance learning model. We continue to evaluate our progress, collect and review stakeholder feedback and data, and conduct needs assessments. As Ms. Dutra shared, our meeting with stakeholders is on September 16th. We also have an online survey, which is open until September 18th. We will continue to collect feedback and data to complete our draft plan. So the LCAP and the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan are closely aligned. They both focus on equity, They include actions and services. They provide a plan summary of increased and improved services. And we have 2 meetings for the board to review and adopt. The learning continuity and attendance plan is a fluid plan, including actions and services and anticipating actions and services that are supported by the Federal CARES Act, Learning Loss Mitigation Funds, and LCFF supplemental concentration and grant dollars. As Ms. Dutra shared, the plan is global because it includes instructional service and operations. 2 sections that will be very familiar to you in the plan are the general information section and the stakeholder consultation and engagement section. And here is our GOBO infographic draft plan overview, starting with our district story. So this is just, we're almost at 16,700, I believe. That was last week. And you could see the information on our student groups. And there are 4 focus areas of the plan under supporting learning continuity. This includes, again, stakeholder engagement, distance learning, learning loss, and student well-being. The overview also displays the instructional phases, and of course, we have started in our distance learning phase of instruction. So under continuity of learning, the in-person instructional offerings section is an overview, an introduction to all 4 of the sections of the plan. It is a description of the actions we will take to offer classroom-based instruction whenever possible, particularly for students who have experienced significant learning loss. This section includes description of the 4 phases, outlines the protocols for safety, learning, and social emotional well-being. It reviews assessment and accountability and provides an overview of teacher and student resources and strategies to support students. Here are some actions and services that are in the section of the plan. For example, funds have been allocated to purchase personal protective and cleaning equipment and to support student supervision. We continue to allocate according to the needs as they arise. This slide outlines 3 of the 6 sections under distance learning. Under continuity of instruction, 2 things that I want to point out are the distance learning launch meetings, which were highly supported by parents, and our planned learning model, including systematic procedures and daily learning schedules. Under pupil participation and progress, I want to point out the pacing guides that have been provided to our teachers. These guides support teachers as they respond to unfinished learning and are used to ensure instructional time is maximized. The access and service sections highlights our commitment to ensuring access to devices and internet connectivity so that students can all participate and achieve measurable learning goals. This slide outlines the 3 other sections under distance learning. Professional learning includes all the opportunities that have been and will continue to be provided to our staff members. Highlights include the summer learning offer to include instruction during distance learning and online platforms and communication trainings. Professional learning will be continued to be offered and will include ongoing curriculum related opportunities, and our administrators will continue to focus on high quality instruction. Staff roles and responsibilities. This highlights how staff have transitioned to distance learning model and health and safety protocols. The last section is pupils with unique needs. This section really emphasizes the additional supports that are required to address the unique needs of our English learners, special education students, foster youth students, and pupils who are experiencing homelessness. For example, for English learners, we will be providing additional opportunities, meetings with their teachers via Zoom or Google Meets, and lessons that include opportunities for speaking practice. This year, we have a full-time foster youth liaison to support our foster youth students. And I also want to point out and highlight that our expanded learning department is doing what they're doing to provide extended learning. In particular, I want to share about a program that they are working on in collaboration with the City of Santa Maria and the Good Samaritan Shelter. This will provide instructional support during the day for up to 30 students living in the local shelter within Santa Maria boundaries. The goal of this program is to limit learning loss by providing a learning environment that is more appropriate to students who need students' needs with this targeted population. Although the planning is still in progress, we anticipate that the program will be up and running by mid-October. And here are some examples of where our budget will support these areas, including the following. I want to point out that there are many others that actions and services that support instructional services. One of these listed on here is our student instructional materials and supplies. Instructional materials and supplies were provided to students and staff. Our students received these during the distance learning launch meetings, and they will receive them again in October and November. These supplies include general supplies, replacement band instruments, packets, books, specific grade level materials. Examples are kindergarten magnetic letters and numbers. And I really want to thank the purchasing department and warehouse for their hard work on ensuring that these materials were ordered and delivered to the sites. We also had leaders and teachers who, if students didn't get their materials, were out delivering them last Friday before we started our distance learning. The next section includes pupil learning loss and effectiveness of pupil learning loss. The first area I want to highlight is our plan to ensure high quality instruction, progress monitoring, and the utilization of evidence-based instructional strategies. The second area outlines how we will be addressing unfinished learning by ensuring that our assessments focus on how to support students having grade level content and that we provide expanded learning opportunities and supplemental intensive support. Finally, learning loss will be measured by ongoing assessments. Having a scheduled set of assessments and using common assessments through Northwest Evaluation Association, an online assessment tool that is aligned with our Common Core standards, will help us know where kids are and what they need at a district level to determine learning loss and monitor progress throughout the year. The last section is the student well-being, which includes mental health and a social emotional well-being, pupil engagement and outreach, and nutrition services. I want to highlight under mental health and social emotional well-being that we will be providing social emotional learning through the Lions Quest lessons, and that our culture climate team has developed a presentation to include resources and guidance on implementing social emotional norms. Under pupil engagement and outreach, I want to highlight all of the additional resources that we have provided. We have our Santa Maria Bonita School District Helpline, online registration support, videos, personalized calls, parent square meetings, home visits, community outreach, and regular parent-teacher communication. Finally, under nutrition services, our food service department continues to distribute meals, including hot meals, providing distribution at 16 sites, and early and later morning accommodations for working parents. I have learned this afternoon that we were issued a waiver from the U.S. Department of Agriculture through the Seamless Summer Feeding Program to feed all children up to age 18 through December 31st. Breakfast and lunch will be served. This is a very positive news for our families and community. Some examples of where our budget will be support these actions and services are listed above. I do want to point out that there is a lot of time, increased time for staff and to support student learning and parent outreach. Also, there's an increase in parent communication and support, and a big increase of health materials and supplies. So for our next steps, we're going to review the student and stakeholder feedback and survey data. We're also going to have our next stakeholder meeting, as I mentioned, on September 16th. And then we will complete the draft plan using stakeholder feedback. And finally, on September 23rd, we have our board meeting for the learning continuity and attendance plan and school plan for student achievement. Those are our SIPSA site plans. So I want to thank you. And if you have any questions at this time.
Go ahead, Ms. Flores.
Are you going to explain a little bit about the what was it? So we moved it up. The attendance plan?
I think I think Dr. Zimmerman's on the line if he wants to explain.
Oh, okay. So it will come later on?
No, he could explain it now.
Oh, okay.
So attendance, we've changed the focus now. It's no longer called attendance. We're referring to it as engagement. So the way that engagement looks now for all students is they attend a Zoom. So you're wondering about how they're coded, how we're accounting engagement. I just want to make sure I'm going to answer it the right.
Basically, I'm just wondering, I realize teachers are already doing whatever it is that was presented.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered, because we're going to be, it's going to be coming back on September 23rd, just a clarity in terms of how it's working. I know teachers and staff members have it in play right now. Is there going to be a way to get feedback on how it is moving, in the classrooms, how it's moving successfully, or maybe if there's ongoing and if they're tweaking it? I know it's now changed to engagement according to what you said. So is that meaning that there is constant tweaking that will be going on, or is this it? Is this the plan that's going to remain for the rest of distance learning?
So there's some legal requirements that we have to follow, and there's ways
Right.
that we have to document it. We met with the junior high principals today, and they're doing some things that are going to be specific to the junior highs, but we are following a tiered system of support to make sure that students are engaged. So all schools are doing, calls. They're doing robocalls with Parent Square at the beginning and at the end of the day to make sure parents are aware. In addition, they're having their staffs. They're determining how they use their staffs in order to make those calls as well, to have another layer, a tiered layer of support. And then by the time a student misses 3 days within a week and they have not accessed their curriculum within 60% of the school week, we are sending people out to the homes. We have our Fighting Back truancy mentors, that one per cluster, and those people they'll be making home visits to follow up with the families. They may need to go to the places of work to find the parents, let them know, hey, this is important. Your kids need to be logging on. This is very, these are the processes that we need to follow. So we have levels of support that we'll be following. Are we going to be possibly changing things? We are working with a couple systems right now. We've got there's an engagement log that we're using through Google Sheets right now. And because Aries hasn't come up with something to track that right now. It's going to be rolled out, I think, September 21st. So there may be a shift with that. If we find that the Aries program has something better to track attendance, we'll move towards that. But if we look at it and we take input and it's like, this isn't as good as what we already have going to monitor weekly engagement and show, what the teachers are doing in the classrooms, what kind of lessons they're doing. If the Google Sheets isn't working as well, we'll make that adjustment at that time. So there is some flexibility right now, but there are some legal requirements that we have to follow and we can't bend on.
Okay, that makes sense. In an elementary setting, and They take roll call just once a day in the morning, like we used to in the olden days?
So
So
let me clarify. I want to step in. Even though this is called the Learning Continuity and Attendance
Okay.
Plan, from an operational standpoint, we aren't taking attendance anymore. It's
Okay.
engagement and participation. So to go back to your original question, Vita, what the legislation required is that this plan needed to be adopted by the board by September 30th. There are some school districts that haven't even started yet.
Right.
Right, so we have the advantage of at least starting. So what we have in place, we're gonna absolutely need to modify along the way.
Okay.
But that piece around attendance, we're not getting funded through apportionment like we have historically. When the legislation passed, AB 77 and then SB 98, it provided base funding based on last year's enrollment. And so our requirement now is to track engagement and participation. So, logically in an online environment, a child would need to be, one of the expectations would be that they would be present during that online, but there are also other ways to participate. And that's what we're building the systems around, is the follow-up if a child is not present in that synchronous learning. How are we making the contacting the parents, making work available to them so that they can meet the engagement standard, because there's those two pieces. So it's a big mind shift. As we've had these conversations, I put a jar on my desk, and anytime someone says attendance, they have to put a quarter in the jar. Because we're not really, even though this says learning continuity and attendance, we're not taking attendance. It's really monitoring engagement, participation.
So
And that's just a hard mind shift for somebody like me who's been doing this for decades. What's the first thing I did every day as a teacher? Took attendance. What was the first thing I did as a principal? Made sure everybody submitted their attendance. What did we all sign as teachers? We signed those attendance registers. This new requirement that Brian's talking about, that we don't have a platform yet within our student information system, which is what will be audited. The template that I shared with the board, because it just came out on the 28th of August, I believe, that engagement and participation template.
Right.
It's like those old attendance registers that we used to sign before we did online attendance. We used to sign at the end of the week. I assert that these kids were here and present on these days. Now we're asserting this is the engagement, the activities that I provided. This is whether or not students participated.
Okay.
So it's a big mind shift.
Okay. And teachers are still signing this, right?
We have the template from the state. We're retaining all the information. What we've been told, Aries represents about 70% of the districts in the state. So they have committed to developing an aligned engagement and participation piece that will allow that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Aries is behind.
Just like this. Well, the requirements came out late.
But I'm just saying
they made 4 or 5
able to fulfill that
modifications over the weekend 2 weeks ago on trying to figure out how we can make this as seamless as possible.
All right. Thank you.
So can I clarify on that? Because I had similar questions, but not necessarily on, I'm not going to put a quarter in it. But my question was, Brian, in regards to the asynchronous engagement and then also retention, because from what I'm hearing is not just that kids come on, but kids then don't stay on and stay engaged throughout the day. So that part of the asynchronous portion of the day, and then the asynchronous. So for example, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if a student isn't in class or they're in synchronous learning, scheduled synchronous learning hours, but then turns something in later, then that counts for engagement. Is that?
That would count.
Okay, so that's participation. So what kind of, are we still then also in some kind of fluidity of setting some kind of a standard for that, or what an expectation would be, or how is the teacher supposed how are our teachers supposed to deal with that?
So we're looking at that right now. We do have, so a student that turns in any work will be asynchronous during the day. So they would get their participation engagement would be counted as asynchronous. But we are looking at possibly looking at what areas can provide to provide more information. So that way, if a child does have, it shows that they've been synchronous every day, but they're only in there for 5 minutes a day and they end up not doing well, that there'll be some kind of documentation to share with parents as to why they did have engagement throughout, but they did struggle with their grades. So yes, we are looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, because for me, it's not what happens at the end. It's trying to make sure that we're going, that as we go along, that we're keeping them engaged and not having it be something where, because I mean, this is obviously our biggest concern is this is how kids get, either if they're already behind, further behind, or we're not reaching everybody. So thank you. It's the high school. Mr. Ontiveros talked last night. I think Mr. Flores did a presentation on Poor Vita. As far as, is that something that you're familiar with? The high school. That might be something that it sounded like from listening to their meeting, something that might be something that would be good to look at as far as our SEL stuff, the social emotional learning piece. And then the other thing that I was going to ask you, Rebecca, was a number of these things, and I'm kind of speaking to this from having spoken with some teachers, but also from my own perspective, from when I switched from a paper chart and documentation, maybe that would be akin to when we're not distance learning, to an electronic medical record, which I would then maybe make the analogy to what we're in now. And what I found and what I'm hearing from teachers is that some of the clerical, a lot of the documentation, a lot of the data entry, and a lot of the translation, and a lot of the things that we're talking about for tracking engagement, and all those things are really time consuming and somewhat, for some of them, overwhelming, and for some of them making them feel like they're attending to those things and not really able to fully execute their teaching strategies. And to continue the analogy, that would be me akin to feeling like I was on the computer all the time instead of really giving as much time to the patient or my client as I want to do. So is there, in your mind's eye, a look towards or a need towards providing more, and maybe Bijou can answer this too, to providing more staffing or support for some of those things? I think you said that there was one person who was doing the truancy stuff for a whole cluster. I mean, that seems like a lot for one person at this point. Just an example, but I know that, I'm sure those guys, physicians use scribes now for all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying we're going to go there, but I guess so the question is are there staffing considerations that we're looking at or thinking about in that regard?
Mr. Hollinshead, when we discussed this with the SMEA team, it's a team approach, and teachers are also going to be part of those who are contacting students for attendance during office hours and things like that. It isn't just the attendance individual. And I believe what Rebecca was referring to, or Brian, was an additional, not SMBSD employee, but we also do have our attendance clerks, office managers. We're having student supervision aides make phone calls. We're utilizing all of the personnel that we have to create a collaborative team approach in making sure we capture each of our kids.
Well, and I'm not even specifically addressing the engagement issue any longer. It's more just everything. I mean, as you said, the teachers involved in that engagement piece now, they're doing a lot more. I would, in the past maybe call it busy work, but they're involved in a lot more tech stuff where it's data entry or it's working on the computer. So I was just wondering if there was a look towards support in the classroom for some of those things that maybe would allow them to be more in their kids' view, teaching or breaking out in groups or doing, one-on-one type stuff.
Right. I do know that Aries is still working on putting together the entire process. And I know that teachers are being held to the amount of minutes that they are being asked to teach. The first half of the day is synchronous instruction. The second half is the asynchronous, I believe, in office hours. So this is ongoing, and we're looking at it with all of our, with our teachers and our classified staff.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps right now. It's ongoing. It's going to be very.
Right. Uh-oh, that's a really nice picture, Ms. Beltran. Oh, there you're back.
Yeah, no, I hit that by accident. I was trying to mute myself.
Any other questions or discussion for?
Yeah, I was just wondering, how are the hotspots coming on and Wi-Fi and the connectivity for these kids to be engaged? Are we getting?
So that engagement happens?
Yeah, I mean, are we just still having?
So I could answer the question. It looks like Brian's there and he's raising his hand. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had over 500 requests for hotspots, and that's in addition to the ones that were already passed out in the spring, and those have gone out, and we're continuing to monitor that. Every site has a list. They're keeping track of which students need access to hotspots, so they add to that list, and we monitor that list and then provide the hotspots to those families. So it's going well. We're going to have to continue to watch that on a daily basis to make sure we stay on top of that. We understand that the moment we don't have hotspots is the day students start falling behind. And then additionally, we're continuing to work on the towers. We're working in partnership with M&O. We're starting to put up some of the first poles with the goal to have those to be operational by December. Around the same time, the first wave of hotspots are no longer on contract.
How many towers are going to be going up? I mean, I know I came to that one meeting one time and we were talking about it and you were trying them out. And we were getting a good band for waves and everything, but.
Right. Phase one is to install one tower at every school site.
Okay.
And then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Brian.
Absolutely.
And then, Brian, what about I know I've asked you this before, but what about the city's internet or Wi-Fi?
We haven't spoken with them recently about it. We've had some conversations with the high school district, and they would probably be the more obvious intermediate partner on that we'd probably want to partner with.
Thank you, Brian.
And I just have one last question. To get feedback on this engagement plan, are teachers meeting or is it just feedback they're giving their principals? I just wondered how the voices of how something might be tweaked a little bit is happening. There's so much going on. I don't know if that is part of the plan or if it's just things that are being tweaked with a couple of suggestions.
So Mrs. Flores, I could address that.
Mm-hmm.
We continue to collect feedback through stakeholder surveys. And also we have our DLAC members that have been involved that take information back to the site. Our teachers and administration, they're meeting. And as we do our needs assessments, we are hearing a lot from the teachers through surveys, also through, the principals letting us know what is needed. And then we still have the survey that's open online. But there is a continuous connection of getting the information to the sites and then back from the sites to our offices. So we make sure that we're really looking at needs. One thing I was going to say too is we really have tried to make this process easy. If we've heard about a need from a site, even if it's come directly from an administrator or teacher concerning something they need immediately, we let the purchasing department know right away. It's just one small example, but we've tried to make this as seamless as possible to get people what they need. But they're continuing to be our stakeholders and to provide us some feedback on the plan.
And Ms. Herrick, just to add to that, when we say feedback, there's all the formal channels that really Ms. Herrick is talking about, and then there's the multitude of informal channels. So we receive lots of emails, that even one-off emails, just someone emailing in and saying, why didn't you think of this? Those move forward as feedback. Like any possible way that we're getting any kind of feedback from parents walking into Sousa, calling on the phone, teachers when we see them in passing or emails, principals in passing, all of that is also used as feedback as well.
And to kind of go off of that a little bit, Ms. Dutrag, when I see my kids either teaching at home or learning at home, because I've got one teacher and one college student, they all have, and this is something I've heard from some of the teachers as well, is they all have earbuds. Is that something that we've offered to our kids? Because I know with all the distractions in the homes, is that part of what we offer them, or?
Yeah, and that was it. I'll let Rebecca talk in a second, but that was it, straight from direct feedback from kids, parents, and teachers. And so that was one of the first things that Ms. Harris ordered. Same thing with teachers wanting a second screens. We knew right away they would probably need that. As soon as teachers started asking, our team got on board with how can we do that for folks? Because it is easier to teach with two. It's very difficult with one. And you can see in the picture that's up on the screen, if everyone can still see that, you can see our teachers teaching. Those are from Adam, I believe. And they've got all kinds of stuff in their purview. We have a teacher over on the right from Fessler, top right. He's actually got like 3 screens rolling, if I remember correctly. So folks really, what they need, we're trying to get them in real time.
Awesome, thank you.
I did not just commit though to 3 for everyone. I want to make sure that I didn't just lose my on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank goodness Matt's muted. No, I'm just kidding. Mrs. Cordero, are you still with us? Did you have any questions? Didn't mean to stay with us.
In reviewing the plan, I did note that in most of the areas, there were no budget allocations. I'm assuming that will have to be filled in at some point. And I'm also assuming that that may be because we're still trying to calculate costs of some of the things that we know we are going to continue to need. And my other question isn't directly about the plan, but in talking about engagement versus attendance, how is enrollment compared to engagement at this point?
I'll take that question because that's what was written into the law. It's not really stipulated in the LCP itself.
Okay.
So what happens is we're getting funded on last year's apportionment and there's some consideration now for districts that are growing, although we're not at this point. So we're kind of that hold harmless. What is going to be auditable is if a district does not meet those minimum requirements of the 180 days calendar, the 240 minimum minutes, or 180 minutes, or 230 minutes, depending on grade span, daily instruction. Or if the audit does not show that you have maintained those engagement and participation records, what applies is the same old penalties on attendance, just like if you missed a day of instruction. So and I can share with you in the Friday update, the calculations that are in the law if you're really interested, or if you have insomnia. Because what they do is they apply a penalty to your apportionment if you're not meeting the requirements. So that's no different than when auditors would come and audit, are you signing attendance registers? If those were incomplete, if independent study contracts didn't meet the 8 conditions for which you got funded, then the funding was reduced in your subsequent year apportionment through the audit finding.
I do understand that that is not connected for this year. My question really is, in terms of real time, what is our current enrollment and what is the percentage of engagement? Are we having to send people out to check on kids? And what are we finding out about why they're not engaged?
I can
I'm
answer
going to
that.
jump in on Brian's piece, because the requirement of the law is if you haven't had children engaged in 60% of a week, and we've only done this for 1 week, so I don't have a big sample
Right.
size at this point. But we do have numbers, and Brian Rickey has numbers on the numbers of kids that are logging in. I'm looking at them across the room. I think we're at about 97% of kids have been logged in. Now, you're right, Linda, that's not necessarily a measure of engagement.
Right.
Just like that kid who used to sleep in my first period class when I taught high school wasn't necessarily engaged, but we got apportionment because he showed up, right? So the
Yeah.
engagement, that's really and it goes to the heart of John's question, that we're going to have to figure this thing out. This engagement and participation is simply the replacement for the bean counting that we used to do when kids were in seats. The assessment pieces that are in here that are referenced are the measures of, are we actually seeing learning occur, right? Because it's going to be hard pressed in a distance learning environment for really half of the day of what we have traditionally done with kids. That's the bigger concern, right? And so it's, how do we ensure that these systems are providing what you alluded to, John, the opportunity for that participation of kids. And so that's a big mind shift. The more we can get kids in those synchronous online sessions, that's our biggest entry point, right? The offline, the asynchronous stuff, that's a nice alternative, but we got to make sure that we're trying to build that robust for that time during the day. So the office hours that are being maintained by teachers, that's outside of the 240 instructional minutes, what's in the law is you've got to have a strategy for re-engaging kids that aren't engaged. If they're 60% of a week, 3 days out of 5 where we're not getting a response. So it's more than just making a contact with them. It's how do we connect with them? How do we use other resources to find out what the needs are? We know that, just based on the data, kids are logging in. What's the effect to this point? Don't really know, because we're really only, with the holiday, we're really only 8 days in. Well, yeah, it's going to take some time to get a real sample size, which is the hard part of having to have your plan in place by September 30th.
Yeah,
I mean, there are some districts that haven't even started school yet, and they got to have their plan in by September 30th. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that we've got a little bit of feedback already, that we can start asking questions to know what are the things we need to modify, but we're not going to change them overnight.
Well, and my other question goes to, in our learning continuity plan, there were some areas that had budgeted amounts included, but in the teaching and learning sections, as I recall, when I reviewed it today, to be determined, how are we going to be making those decisions? And I'm assuming we can't turn it in at the end of the month without numbers in there.
Vero, I can answer that question. The ones that are to be determined, it is because it is a fluid plan. And as we, have different needs come up, we continue to spend in different areas and actions and services. The ones that are filled in are ones that we're sure of the total of the action and service. And some of those are out of the LCFF supplemental concentration dollars. And then when we do turn in the plan on the 30th, we still have time to allocate some of that funding, the federal funds, through December this year. And so we will get more direction, but the plan won't add up to a certain amount. It's not like the LCAP where we'll add up to a total. So it's very fluid, and it doesn't mean that by December 30th, we have to fill in every number. My understanding, I know Mr. King's on here, and you know, we've had some questions about that same thing, but it will not add up to a total amount.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You good?
I think so. If you include a little something, Luke, in Friday's memo, then that would really help in terms of engagement numbers and I don't know if there's a difference with the junior high school and the high school. I'm sorry, junior high school and elementary in terms of engagement opportunities or check systems or things like that that might have to happen for them. Well, that happens in kindergarten too. Sometimes they'll go on a 10-minute break. It's like, where the heck is the rest of the class? Well, it's so funny. They take longer breaks sometimes.
Oh, I was sorry, I was muted. I apologize. Okay, so that will be forthcoming then on Friday. And I think thank you very much, Rebecca and Melissa,
Rebecca.
all you guys. I know that, and Brian, I know, as you said, Rebecca, this is really super fluid. It's why we've said before that we need to be really flexible and nimble as we go along here. And while that feedback from our parents and our students and especially our teachers is super important, because we want to support all those groups so that we can maintain the highest level that we can in this forum. So if we're going to move on back, it sounds like, as we acknowledge that discussion item, move back into action and go to item 7A, certification of the 2019-2020 unaudited actuals. Matt? Mr. Beecher, I should say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hollinshead. To describe and inform the board on the unaudited actuals, we'll turn the presentation over to Brian King. He'll be available to share information with you and then, of course, to respond to questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Mr. Beecher. I'm going to share my screen here. So as Mr. Beecher said, I'll be going over the 1920 unaudited actuals. We'll be looking at revenue, expenditures, ending fund balance, enrollment, and Form CEA. So this slide looks at the past 12 years of history for revenue. For 2021, I did use our adoption budgeted revenue. So we'll have a more accurate graph come first interim as a result of the 45-day budget revision. But for 18-19, revenue was 232 million. It dips down 19-20 to 228, and then in this graph for 2021 dips down to 213 million. Looking at our expenditures, just kind of for reference, going back 12 years of history, that has climbed up just as our revenue has climbed up. 18-19 expenditures of 232 million, in 19-20, 220 million, then 2021 jumped it back up to 230 million. So our general fund expenditures by function. So function represents the what or the activities or services performed. And so for instruction, 62.1% of our expenditures are for instruction. And that's direct interaction of teachers and students. And that's about 135 million. We also have instruction related, which is administrative, logistical support, and technology. That's 12.4% of our expenditures, which is about $27 million. We have our pupil services, which is health services, transportation, psychologists, counselors, things like that. That's 8.4% or $18 million. And then we have our plant services. So basically what we need to spend to keep our doors open. That's 9% or about $20 million. We also have our general administration at 4%. That includes HR, staff development, board, fiscal services, superintendent, and then our other outgo is 4%. That is basically our payments to the county offices for special education, and that's through the SELPA. So moving on, an analysis of our ending fund balance. So when I put together the 2021 adoption budget, at that same time, I got to put together estimated actuals. So what do we think 1920 will come in at? And so those estimated actuals, we calculated the fund balance to be $54.4 million. But now at unaudited actuals, so we have closed the books, so now we know what the true story is. Our fund balance is $60.4 million. So we did have an increase in fund balance of about $6 million from our estimated actuals to our unaudited actuals. And when you compare that to our total expenditures, you get a percentage of variance to projected expenditures of about 2.7%, which is a standard acceptable variance. Last year, I think I was at about 4.9%. So I got a little better this year. So what makes up that $6 million is those items down below. Everything, basically, we got to take there's that line there that I put. Everything below the line is offset against everything above the line to get to that $6 million fund balance increase. And so we did have a revenue decrease of about $725,000. That's some prior year revenue adjustments. We also have our CARES learning loss mitigation dollars, 3.7 million. So we didn't have this 3.7 million in budget at adoption. We didn't have it at estimated actuals, but we did spend $3.7 million of our CARES learning loss mitigation dollars in 1920. So we are allowed to include expenditures from March 1st through June 30th in 1920. And some of those expenditures were a little under $2 million for Chromebooks. We have plexiglass, gloves, hand sanitizer, other needed supplies. Our STIRS in kind, $2.8 million. That was not in budget. That came about as a result of SB 90. And so the state said, hey, you have to increase your STIRS in kind by $2.8 million. So you have those three at the top, that's about 7.2 million. And then now below the line, LCAP implementation. So there's about $4.6 million of expenditures that didn't happen for LCAP. That includes, it's a number of things: aids, professional development, summer school, ACES support, site dollars, technology, teacher tutors, special education, $785,000. That's cost, basically that's on the SELPA side. So cost came in lower than we thought. And so by about $785,000. The restricted programs, $5 million. That's made up of Title I, 1.2 million, migrant, 1.2 million, Title II, 130,000, ACES, 630,000, Title III, 470,000. So it all kind of adds up to about $4 million. And then unrestricted expenditures came in lower by 2.5 million. That includes transportation, about $200,000. Technology for a live-in school. Some technology came in after June 30th, so we count that expenditure in the next fiscal year. Same thing with our science adoption. We anticipated receiving some of our science adoption materials in June. It got pushed to July, so we recognized that it was expenditures in 2021. Also, there was a drop from utility costs, about $350,000. And so all those items below the line are 12.9 million. So 12.9 million offset by 7.2 is almost gets us to that $6 million fund balance increase. So moving on, looking at our fund balance, in this fund balance, I did use our 45-day budget revision for 2021. And so looking at 1920, that's the kind of the high point there, any fund balance of $60.5 million with 4.2 of that restricted. And then on to 2021, ending fund balance of 52.7 with 7.1 million restricted, but we have those red dots show up again, which means deferrals. We haven't seen those since 2013-14. And so we have about $36.6 million in deferrals in 2021. So that's a large percentage of our ending fund balance of 52.7. And then our estimate for 2021 is 34 million, and 22-23 is 28 million. Did want to point out that in 21-22, that 34 million, that is less than the deferrals for 2021. So what does that mean? That means in 21-22, if the state wanted to give us the same amount of deferrals, then we would be we try to figure out how we're going to get through that problem. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. So moving on, this is how the 1920 unaudited actuals turned out. Total revenue of 228.4 million, total expenditures 220.5 million. So we had a net increase in our fund balance of almost $7.9 million. And when you add that to our beginning fund balance of 52.6, that's where you get the ending fund balance of $60.4 million. The latest information we have for elementary school districts for our ending fund balance percentages from 18-19, that average is about 21%, an average for elementary school districts. But for 19-20, our ending fund balance is about 25%. So looking at enrollment, I was able to pull this information together. We have our CBEDs, so our enrollment information from 2014-15 to 2019-20 listed there. And then we have our estimated enrollment for 2021 as of a certain date, as of August 31st, which was 16,658. So that's a drop of 301 from 2019-20. So moving on, distance learning active participants. So I got this slide here from Mr. Ricky, and I kind of wanted to go over it here. So this graph tells us how many unique students logged into the Clever platform in those 7 days. And if you look at September 2nd, where it says the number is 16,026, this is the total number of unique students on just that one day. So, and that percentage on the left in the middle, that 98.9%, so that is saying of all of our active rostered students, 98.9% of them logged in at least once during this 7-day period. So moving on, Form CEA. So this calculation is a legal requirement, and it's what CEA stands for: current expense of education actuals, and it's used to determine the percentage of expenditures for the direct classroom costs of teaching students. So they take teacher salaries, they take benefits for teachers and paraprofessionals, measure that against the total expenditures of the district. And for an elementary school district, our percentage is 60%. We have the highest requirement. And so for the last 6 years, 6 years in a row, we haven't met the requirement, going back to 2013-14. And if you remember back, 2013-14 was the first year LCFF came around. And so it's no coincidence that that's when it started. But for 2019-20, we met that requirement. We're at 60.59%. So I dug in just a little deeper to kind of understand why we finally met that requirement. We did say it had costs, some of our outside services, they went down compared to last year. Also, books and supplies went down compared to last year. We had a slight drop in salaries and benefits because we didn't have any additional pay or extra time paid for March, April, May, and June of 1920. And so our numerator, our total expenditures went down, but our denominator of salaries and benefits went down too. And so that percentage came out to 60.59. So I wanted to kind of bring this back because every year at this time I talk about it. We submit a waiver to the county and they've always blessed it, but we don't have to do that this year. And so with that, I'm open for any questions.
No. All right, Mrs. Cordero, anything? I'm sorry, I had to swing over and see you there, Linda. Okay, so I have none as well. Thank you, Brian, for that. Can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that the Board of Education approve the 2019-2020 unaudited actuals as presented in board as a positive certification to the county superintendent of schools.
Second.
All right, been moved by Mr. Lara, seconded by Ms. Flores, that the board approved the 2019-2020 unaudited actuals as presented and forward a positive certification to the county superintendent of schools. Roll call.
Mrs. Flores,
Aye.
Mr. Lara,
Aye.
Mrs. Cordero.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Mr. Hollinshead.
Aye. All right, moving on to item 7B, public hearing, temporary borrowing between funds. Open the public hearing. Anyone? Bueller? All right. Close that public hearing. Mr. Beecher, are you doing 7C?
Yes, I am. Are we ready? So this resolution is required for the board's consideration and approval if the district is going to be engaging in interfund borrowings. So during Mr. King's presentation on the unaudited actuals, he shared with you the expected deferrals for 2020-21. You can see that the number, if I recall correctly, was around $36 million. It's a significant sum of money. In the first year, based on those reserve estimates, it looks like we'll have the cash we need to continue on with our operations and commit to our obligations for our vendors and for our employees. In the next year, if there aren't replacement revenues that come to the state that allow them to cut us checks and pay us our apportionments, it will be a different story as far as what our ability to continue to pay our bills and meet our obligations will be. When our reserve balance will be less than the projected, or at least if it's reflected in the next year, the deferral amounts. So what this resolution will allow us to do is look for cash contained in funds other than the general fund. So that fund, let's say it's Fund 40, right? Capital Projects Fund, or maybe it's Fund 67, our self-insurance fund. Those funds can then loan money to the general fund on a temporary basis. This year in the statute, they allowed us to increase the percentage of the borrowing amount from 75% to 85%, but they also required that public hearing we just held. Both of those are new requirements. And so that is the purpose of this resolution tonight, just to keep our options open. If all we end up dealing with is deferrals as budget solutions, this option is a really good option to address those needs. If we end up finding that we have reductions in our revenues caused by the state and the state's reflection of what their resources are, or if down the road, after quarter in the jar attendance begins to be taken again for students coming to school, and our enrollment number also drops, we'll have a reduction in revenue coming from that. Those kinds of solutions can't be met with, or those kinds of challenges, but fiscal challenges can't necessarily be met with interfund borrowings, because the borrowing has to be temporary. But at this point, this will assist us in getting through the periods where our main fiscal impact is from deferrals. And before I open it up for questions, I want to make sure and give credit and thanks to my friend Jim Empey. He's the Assistant Superintendent for Business Services at Lucia Mar. He shared with our group of CBOs this template, made it real easy for us to bring this for the school board's consideration tonight.
Matt, what's the time frame for replenishing the fund that you've borrowed from? If I probably missed that. I mean, is there like a time frame? Is it June 30th by the end of the year? You have to.
Right. There is a time frame. It's probably in the resolution. I think it's right here, which says amounts transferred shall be repaid either in the same fiscal year or in the following fiscal year if the transfer takes place within the final 120 days of.
Oh, okay, I see it there.
So,
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it is limited.
Call that.
Very careful about that because, as you can imagine, if it wasn't scripted, districts could end up upside down, right? And the services funded through those other funds would suffer. And so that's why there is that scripted limitation right there. It's in your resolution, which provides the authorization, which mandates that we follow it. And then it'll also be something that our county office pays attention to as we make these borrowings to make sure that we follow that script. Good question. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions, Mrs. Cordero? All right. Anybody got a motion?
Yes, I make a motion that the Board of Education approve and adopt resolution 2001 approving temporary borrowing between funds as presented.
I'll second. So been moved by Mrs. Flores, seconded by Mr. Lara, that the board approve and adopt resolution 20-01 approving temporary borrowing between funds as presented. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Flores,
Aye.
Mr. Lara,
Aye.
Mrs. Cordero, thumbs up, Mr. Hollinshead.
Aye. All right, motion passes. Move on to item 7D, resolution 20-02, establish 2019-2020 appropriations limit pursuant to Article 13B of the California Constitution.
Okay, so I'll talk to that this evening. So this is an annual housekeeping item. So in 1979, Paul Gann helped enact Prop 4, which limited the growth in government spending to be no faster than the growth in population and inflation. This was later changed to be based on a change in per capita personal income. So each year, school districts are required to prepare Gann limit calculations by the state constitution and have the governing board adopt a resolution to identify the appropriations limit for the district. Gann limits only constrain the appropriations from state and local tax resources, so federal aid is excluded. In essence, what the Gann limit does is it's there to limit or control the local authority of districts to levy or increase taxes. But as a result of Prop 13, the power for the districts to levy taxes was essentially taken away. And these Gann limit calculations are automatically done for us in our SACs, in SACs. And so it kind of just spits out the form and gives us the numbers. And so the 1920 actual appropriations limit calculation is 114,994,346. And the estimate for 2021 is 119,128,566. So presented for your consideration and possible adoption is this resolution to establish the GAN limits.
Well played, sir.
And make a recommendation that the Board of Education adopt Resolution 2002 established in 2019-20 appropriation limit pursuant to Article 13B of the California Constitution as presented.
I'll second. Moved by Mrs. Flores, seconded by Mr. Lara, that the board adopt resolution 20-02, establish the 2019-2020 appropriations limit pursuant to Article 13B of the California Constitution as presented. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Flores,
Aye.
Mr. Lara,
Aye.
Mrs. Cordero, thumbs up, and Mr. Hollinshead.
Aye. Motion passes. All righty then. We'll move back to discussion. Sorry, am I on? Yep. Discussion item 8B, workers' compensation unfunded liability.
That's me again. So the Ed Code requires districts who are self-insured for workers' compensation claims to annually disclose in a public meeting the estimated accrued but unfunded liability for those claims. So here's a recap of reserves and net position for the district. This information comes from the Joint Powers Santa Barbara County Self-Insurance Program for Employees, the financial statements dated June 30th, 2019. So in the red, the liability incurred but not reported is $1,244,781. That's reported claims and bills not yet received. Also, the reserves in the yellow there for the district is a healthy $1,883,883. So what this information shows that the district does not have a accrued and unfunded liability for workers' compensation claims. So therefore, the district is not required to make a reservation of its fund balance. So we would have an action item in future years if the district needs to set aside funds.
Sounds like a really good thing.
Okay.
I make a recommendation that the Board of Education acknowledge receipt of the annual workers' compensation claims information as presented.
Oh, well, I'll acknowledge receipt of the annual workers' compensation claims information as presented.
Good one.
Good one.
Just realized.
That's like stereo
Yeah, and then some.
or an echo. Better yet, it was like an echo. Or you probably don't want to sound like me though. All right, moving on to item 8C. We got a lot of room in numerals tonight, I tell you. Item 8C, report of actuarial evaluation for retiree health benefits program under GASB 75.
So that's me again here. So this is an annual housekeeping item required by Ed Code. We're required to describe the actuarial liability of the district's retiree health benefits. So this is the estimated accrued but unfunded liability for the post-retirement benefits. It's important to note that this is a closed pool, meaning the report is based and calculated on actual employees and actual retirees, not potential future employees. We are pay-as-you-go, meaning we only pay for what we need for that year. To qualify for the post-employment benefits, an employee must have at least 10 full years of service, be at least 55 years old, and the benefits will then end when the member reaches age 65. Any change in the health insurance costs do increase the cost of the post-employment benefits. So the actuarial liability as of July 1st, 2018 was $16,881,735. So this number represents the net present value of future costs. And this is made up of liability of about 2.2 million for retirees and 14.7 million for active employees. We're required to have a supplemental report, and that's dated June 30th, 2019, which shows the actuarial liability of $18,367,970. So the two valuations include benefits for 73 retirees and 1,250 active employees who may be eligible for the benefits. And so what an actuary looks at to come up with these numbers is healthcare costs, district cap, healthcare trends, mortality tables, and potential number of participants. And so they try to create a formula to measure risk and uncertainty, and they spit out that number of that $18 million.
All right, any questions, discussion? That GASB 75 stuff is all done then. Thanks, Mr. King. I'll go ahead and acknowledge receipt of the report of actuarial revaluation for our retiree health benefits program under GASB 75 as presented. So, move back here. Mr. Valencia, we're a little bit flip-flop for the time being on where in our board and superintendent reports come as opposed to the public comment section. It's I think flip-flop from what you're probably used to at the high school board meetings. So at this time, if any board members have anything they'd like to share or report.
I was just gonna say that September 29th, Mr. Valencia, has been set as a date for new board member training, so to speak, to come aboard, county sponsoring it, and hear what's going on. It's a Zoom connection from 6:30 to 8:30. And I'm not sure, I saw the email come in just a little while ago, so I'm not sure who you contact if you are interested. Many of us are going to be on the Zoom for information review, that kind of thing. It might be a good thing to take advantage of. I found it very interesting when I came aboard. Other than that, I'm busy Zooming school.
Well, and where's Mrs. Cordero? Are you you have anything there, Montana lady?
Nope, she's shaking her
Okay.
head.
My earphones just died, so how's that for timing? Yeah, and for me it's really just that like I did mention, I've spoken with teachers in both our district and Orchid, and probably part of that is, and a few in the high school, part of that is because my immediate family is littered with them. I can't go anywhere without bumping into one. But really, I wanted to share some of the things, some of the reflections that they've made in about what's going on in their classrooms, and what I found in some of the ones that aren't in my family is that they are working on a lot of things that we anticipated. But as we discussed, I think there's things that are just coming up that are really starting to kind of, they're just small logistic things, but other things that maybe weren't anticipated or maybe didn't foresee coming. So I thank the district staff for being so on that and continuing to take in, Melissa, like you said, all that formal and informal feedback, because I think that's really important to support. We're trying to support as best we can our families first, for sure, because as we've all seen, there's multiple kids, multiple grade levels trying to go to school in the same homeroom, real literal homeroom, right? Their own one-room schoolhouse, and then of course we've got teachers who maybe in contrast to the past, having the child next to a student poking them or talking to them, they've got dogs barking in the background and all kinds of other things going on, and on top of that, just really learning a whole new system and adapting and trying to see what works best to deliver that student engagement so that we don't lose them, so that loss mitigation isn't something that's really profound when we get to the end of all this. So for me, I just wanted to give that explanation as to why I shared that, the questions I had for teacher and especially teacher support, but also to say thank you guys for that, and thank you especially to the boots on the ground, the teachers and site staff that are supporting one another. That's again, because as we've talked about before, that's really the big part is being supportive of one another, because that's, lifting each other up and being supportive and is the way we're going to move forward in a positive way and effectively from this point forward. That's all I got.
What you got? I just want to thank Rebecca, Brian, Melissa, our principals, the scores of staff members that contributed to the reentry plan over the summer. It was all theory, and now we're doing it, right? And it's incumbent, it's going to take some tinkering to figure it out. And what you said, John, is true. We've got to work together to do that. And just around the notion of engagement and participation, we met the 31st on, which was really our first day that before we were launching. That September 1st date was when we really had to start meeting those requirements. We set up an operations meeting with all of the site leaders and with the team, saying this is what this engagement and participation design looks like, right? So here's how, so we're going to have to figure out how to implement it, right? There's no sample to build off of. There's no model. We're just learning by doing, like before said. We circled back, met with the junior high principals today, because the junior high world I think you mentioned that before, John, is different than an elementary design. So how do we need to modify that in order to meet those needs? And we'll continue to circle back and really try and get things wired. But to pull all that information together in such a short period of time and have such a short runway to get the plan adopted, when we haven't even really had a chance to implement it yet, is just kind of the whim of being a public school. Legislature says you will, you will. And so, but we will continue to monitor those platforms and ensuring that kids are learning at high levels. Nicole Wiseman and I were on a call with a principal today, and he talked about a teacher came, and there was a family that's taken care of, not only their own children, but 10 children in the home. Imagine what that's like. 10 kids online. And so they made they contacted the family, did outreach. How can we help you? There's, 10 kids is, there was 9 in my family, so I know how crowded it can be. But we weren't, thank God there weren't computers then. It was go outside. Now we're inside trying to figure this stuff out. Logged back in the next day, the family had gone and bought shower curtains, put up barriers for each of the kids, really doing their best to make it work. And that's really what all of us are trying to figure out. How do we best make this work? And we'll figure it out, because it's going to be for the duration. We did get information last week. I shared with the board on Friday that Department of Public Health has provided criteria for bringing back cohorts of kids. We met with public health and the county superintendents yesterday to really line out what those expectations are. There's an expectation that anybody on staff where cohorts are returned will be subject to surveillance testing, which is everybody on site tested within a 2-month cycle. Some of our staff was in a meeting with county HR today with public health, determining how that might be accessed, right? Because we know that there's not the ample amount of testing that's necessary. With the new monitoring system, we remain in purple, which is the highest, most restrictive level. Those new figures were released by state public health, which means that the soonest, if Santa Barbara County gets into red, then we could be eligible to start bringing children back onto campuses. And here we are just trying to figure this out after 8 days, right? That you probably saw in the news, there's individuals want kids back in school. We're getting information now. Thanks to Maggie has been sending me news from all over about, now we're starting to get sample sizes about what happens with infection rates. And so we've got to take all that into consideration, just like we take all these pieces into consideration around this planning, and make the decision that's safe first, knowing that that there's going to be some, there's going to have to be some flexibility, as you referred to, John, when we brought the plan a couple of months ago. There's got to be some flexibility and some grace in determining how this works. That being said, we have folks that are just doing phenomenal stuff. I got, I've always been a twit, but now because of Twitter, I'm an official twit. And so my insomnia every night is to pick up my phone and get on Twitter and to see how our folks are sharing, but where folks are sharing across the country about, here's something that works, here's something that made an impact, right? That's really, we got to get more of that into the conversation. How do we make it work? There's 1,000 ways things don't work. That's Edison's great quote. I didn't invent the light bulb. I figured out 1,000 ways not to, right? And so we've got to be forward leaning, forward thinking about how do we make this the best possible year for every child, because this is the year they're going to get regardless of grade. And we've got to make sure that we're doing, everybody's doing everything they can to build, to deepen our understanding and deepen that support. And then finally, I want to welcome Mr. Valencia. I was, when I spoke with Mrs. Oliver today, and because I had an opportunity and cabinet met with Mr. Valencia last week, just to kind of go over the things that are in place. I really appreciate the fact that his secondary experience is going to bring a perspective to our board that we haven't had. And he and I've had a little bit of interaction through some of the work has gone on in the high school district around implementing their ethnic studies requirements. So I'm excited about building that bridge and upping the ante for getting our kids more robustly prepared for their secondary and post-secondary experience. So I appreciate your being on the screen with us tonight. Welcome. And like I say, we're all in this together. So we'll link arms and move forward. And that's all I got.